Today we will be making the vintage Catghan sweater that I've seen a couple of times. This is based on Sandra Miller Maxfield's design, and I went onto stitchfiddle.com and recreated this design but with my colors. The main color that I chose is white, and I will be using 4 different shades of blue for the cats. And for this pattern I made 4 different pieces that I sewed together in the end. I first made 2 sleeves and 2 panels, one for the front and one for the back that were identical. I used a 5mm crochet hook and a yarn needle to sew in my loose ends. First, I'll start with the sleeves. So I'm going to be starting where the cuff of the sleeve is. To start, we'll need a slip knot. And to make a slip knot, hold your yarn with the tail end at the bottom, wrap the top part around 2 of your fingers to form an X, use your hook and go under and over and pull that piece of yarn through, and then remove your fingers and tighten the knot. Then I'm going to chain 11. To chain, yarn over and pull through. So again, you just yarn over and pull through. And this will be the width of the cuff. It goes along your arm, not around it. If you want this to be longer or shorter, you can adjust the number of chains that you do. After I've chained 11, I'm going to half double crochet into the second chain from the hook. To half double crochet, yarn over, insert your hook into the second chain from the hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops. Again, yarn over, insert your hook into the next chain, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops. And now I'll just do this all the way across into every single chain until I have a total of 10 half double crochets. Once I've finished my 10 half double crochets, I'm going to chain 1 and then turn. And then I'll start working half double crochets into the back loops only. So you want to yarn over and then go through the top into the center of that V, come out the back side, and then yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. So we're just doing the same half double crochets but working only into the back loops. And once I reach the end, I'm going to chain 1, turn, and do that same thing over again. And I'm going to be doing the same thing until it fits when I wrap it around my wrist. I did a total of 14 rows, and now we can slip stitch the ends together. First, we'll go into the front loop of that first stitch right next to the hook. And then we'll grab the other end and go over and into the back loop at the other end. And then to complete the slip stitch, yarn over and pull through, and then pull through the loop on the hook. And again, you want to insert your hook into the front loop of the next stitch, go over and into the back loop of the next stitch on the other side, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through again. And then we'll just continue this until we reach the end. Once we're finished slip stitching the cuff closed, we can chain 2 and then start working double crochets into the side of the ribbing. To double crochet, yarn over, insert your hook into the side of the very first row, yarn over, pull through, then yarn over and pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through the last 2. So again, it's a yarn over, insert your hook into the side of the first row again, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And then I'm just going to do 1 more into the side of the first row. So I will be doing 3 double crochets into the side of each ribbed row for a total of 42 stitches. And you can increase or decrease this number of stitches depending on how baggy you want the sleeve to be. Now that I've finished my 42 double crochets, we can slip stitch and start the next round. To slip stitch, insert your hook into the very first double crochet of this round. So we're going to skip the chain 2 that we did and go under both loops that make the V from our first double crochet of this round. So again, to slip stitch, insert your hook into that stitch, yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. And then you want to pull it tight to make sure that the seam is less visible. Now we can chain 2 and start the next round. So every round will end with a slip stitch and start with a chain 2. And our very first stitch of this next round is going to be that same stitch that we just slip stitched into. And for a total of 32 rounds, I'm just going to be doing 1 double crochet into every single stitch. As you work, your seam will start to slant towards the right, and in order to get a straight seam, you can skip the first stitch in every 4th round. So this is optional, but if you want a straight seam, then on your 4th round, you want to do your chain 2, and instead of going into that same stitch you just slip stitched into, you want to skip that one, go into the next one, and after you've gone all the way around, you want to make that first stitch you skipped your last stitch of the round. So for my last stitch, I'm going to double crochet over that chain 2, go into that stitch, and do my double crochet there. And then slip stitch, and it should move your seam back towards the left. And again, I'm only doing this every 4th round. After I've done 32 rounds, I'm going to fasten off. If you want a longer sleeve, do more rounds or less rounds for a shorter sleeve. To fasten off, chain 1 and then cut off a strand of yarn. If you want to use this strand of yarn to sew your sleeve to your front and back panels, then you should leave this strand really long. About 3 feet or 90 centimeters should be long enough. And then you want to pull on that loop that your hook was in and just pull through all of that yarn. We can start working on the front panel. This part started off exactly the same as the sleeves. I made the ribbing at the bottom of the sweater the same width as the cuffs on the sleeves. I started with a slip knot and then I chained 11 and did 10 half double crochets across, but I continued the ribbing for a total of 40 rows. So this length should be about the length from one hip to the other. And instead of working in the round, we're going to be making 2 of these panels and sewing them together. Once I finished my 40 rows of ribbing, I'm going to turn it so I can start working along the side. First we'll chain 2, and then instead of 3 that we did for the sleeve, I'm going to be doing 2 per row. And this number is important because it'll give me a total of 80 stitches, which is the correct number for the graph that I'm using. If you want a smaller or larger sweater, then you would have to adjust this graph by adding more or less cats. And first, it's really important that I say that each of these squares represents 2 double crochets, because when you do 2 double crochets right next to each other, it forms a square. So this graph is 40 by 40 squares, but it means 40 rows and 80 double crochets. So we're going to be starting from the very bottom of the graph and working our way up. So our very first row is just 80 double crochets across in white. So I've just finished the first row and I'm going to use a bobby pin to mark this as my right side. So this is the side that will be on the outside of the sweater, and the wrong side, the other side, I'm going to drop all of my yarn, and that is where I'm going to be sewing all of my loose ends into. Whenever we're working with the right side facing up, we're looking at the graph from right to left. And if it's the wrong side, then we're looking at the graph from left to right. For this next row, we are going to be adding some colors, so I'm going to grab some binder clips to use as bobbins. These really aren't necessary at all, they just help you from tangling your yarn too much, but I do end up just giving up on them completely and just leaving all of my yarn attached. So if you do want to use something like this, then you can just start winding your yarn around it, and you just sort of estimate how much yarn you're going to be needing for each cat. You want to really make sure that you actually want to use these, because if you don't end up giving yourself enough yarn, you're going to end up with a lot more loose ends to sew in. And now we can start row 2, which uses 4 different colors. So first I'll chain 2, and then turn. And like I said before, we are now going to be working from left to right since we are working on the back side up. You can also think of it this way, since round 1 is right side up, every odd round will be working from right to left, and every even will be working from left to right. So starting from left to right, there are 2 white squares before I have to change into my first color. I'm going to call this color number 1. So since there are 2 squares, that means I need 4 double crochets before changing color. Remember that each square is 2 double crochets. And before I finish my 4th one, my last one before the color change, I'm not going to pull through the last 2 loops. I'm going to leave it and then grab my first color and pull through those last 2 loops with that first color. And this just provides a seamless color change. And I'm going to drop my first color's tail end off onto the wrong side of the piece. And I'm going to do the same with my white yarn. This just keeps all of the loose ends on the same side and just makes it a lot easier in the end when you have to sew everything in. And you want to make sure that you leave the tail ends at least a few inches long so that you can sew them in easily. According to my graph, my first color will be in the next 8 squares, which means 16 double crochets. And in my 16th double crochet, I'm going to pull through the last 2 loops into my next color, which is white again. And again, I'm going to drop my yarn on the wrong side and continue with the white. Next is 14 squares in white, which means 28 double crochets. And in my 28th double crochet, I'm going to pull through the last 2 loops with color number 2. Again, I'm just dropping all of my yarn onto the same side, and for color number 2, there are 7 squares, so 14 double crochets. And then I'll switch into color number 3. And then I'll use this color for 16 more double crochets. And for the final square of this row, we're going to be switching back to white and doing our last 2 double crochets. When we're done with row 2, we can chain 2 and then turn. And now we're back to working with the right side up. So this is also an odd row, so we're going to be looking at the graph from right to left. Looking at row number 3, we have 2 double crochets in white, and then we're switching to color number 3 for 4 double crochets. And we can just pick up our color number 3 from where we dropped it last row. And you can see that it creates sort of a line of yarn here, and I'm just going to crochet under that to hide it, but it doesn't really matter because it will be on the inside of the sweater. After doing 4 double crochets in color number 3, you want to switch to the color of yarn for your eyes. And I'm grabbing a new piece of white yarn that isn't already attached to my project. And you want to make sure you're dropping all of the tail ends onto the wrong side, which is the other side since we're now working with the right side up. And while I'm doing the eyes, I'm going to hold my color number 3 yarn so that I can crochet underneath it and carry it along, because we're going to be needing that really soon. Whenever you carry your yarn, you want to make sure to pull it tight so it doesn't scrunch up and poke through. So after I do my 2 double crochets in white for the eyes, I'm going to switch back into color number 3 and do 4 more double crochets. And for this part, I didn't carry the white yarn, but I really recommend that you do. If I were to redo this project, then I would not cut the yarn at this part. I would carry the white yarn like I did with the blue one just now. By cutting the yarn instead of carrying it, it just causes too many loose ends that are unnecessary. So after 4 more double crochets in color number 3, I'm going to switch back to white and do 2 more double crochets for the other eye. And then we'll switch back to blue and then do 4 more for the rest of the cat. After you're done with the second eye, here is where you should cut your yarn. If you carry it over in the middle, you'll end up with 2 loose ends instead of the 4 that I have now. Then switching back to color number 2, we're going to do 10 double crochets in this color and then switch to white. This color change is a little bit different because the colors don't quite line up nicely, and we're going to have to grab the white yarn all the way from where we dropped it from last row, and then we'll pull it through the last 2 loops. And there's going to be this strand of yarn, but we can just double crochet over that and it'll be hidden. So if that ever happens in the graph, then you can just pull the yarn all the way through and just crochet around it. And this is where I leave you until we get to a certain part on the graph. So right now I'm in the top left corner of the graph, and you can see how it changes from 21 to 22. It goes from this green color to white, and so when you get to that part, you want to change into your white before you finish your green color and chain with your white, because the chain will be showing up in that next row and you want it to be that same color as the rest of that row. For the end of row 22, I carried the white yarn along the green, and in my last green I switched into my white because the very next double crochets will be in white. And while I'm doing the white, I'm also carrying along the green because there will be a green square right next to it. And then I'll also be carrying the white again because the white will come directly after. Now I have finished round 24 and I'm done using all of these colors, and I will just be using white for the rest of this front panel. And I did 10 rows in white after my last colored round. So for rounds 25 to 34 I did just white. So after this light blue cat, which is the last cat that I did in color, I did 10 rows of white. And this is where the front panel comes up to your neck, but without the ribbing. For this next part, we are going to be forming the neckline, and we are going to be double crocheting across only part of the way. I started this next row with 25 double crochets, and then I'm going to do 8 rows of 25 double crochets, and I'm going to do the same onto the other side of the panel to form a hole in the middle. So after I've done 25 double crochets, I'm going to chain 2 and then turn and start working 25 double crochets for 7 more rows for a total of 8. And the length of this is just how low you want the neckline to be. So if you made it longer, then the neckline would be lower, and if you made it shorter, then the neckline will be higher. And once I'm done, I'm going to fasten off. First I'll chain 1, and then I'm going to measure out how much yarn I'll need to sew this part to the back panel after I've done it. And I just went 3 times across the top, but I found that you only really need it 2 times across. Now we're going to attach our yarn so we can do the shoulder piece for the other side of the panel. First, you want to make sure that the last row of double crochets is facing the other way. And then we're going to count 25 stitches from the left. And in that 25th stitch, I'm going to insert my hook and I'm going to pull up a loop with my yarn. Make sure to leave a tail end long enough and then chain 2. And the first double crochet should go into that same stitch that we inserted our hook into. And then we'll do 25 double crochets all the way across and then chain 2 and do the same thing for a total of 8 rows. And once we're done, we're going to fasten off with the tail end long enough to sew the top of the shoulders together. And you only need to leave a tail this long for sewing on one of the panels. So for my second one, I won't be needing to leave it this long. Now we're done with our first panel, and I'm going to do one identical to this one for the back panel. If you want the design just on the front, then you can just do the back panel with all of your base color. Just make sure that you have the same number of rows on each panel. The next step is to sew the tops of the shoulders together so we can work on the collar. First, you want to lay the panels right on top of each other with the right sides facing out, so all of the loose ends are on the inside. First, thread that long piece of yarn through your yarn needle, and we're going to be doing the whip stitch into the outer loops on both panels. So we're going to be going in a sort of clockwise motion, and we're going to go through the back and go through only the back loop of the back panel and go over and into the front loop of the front panel. And then pull all the yarn through, make sure it's taut, and then we're going to go back around into the back of the next stitch, over and into the front of the front panel, and pull it taut, and just continue going in that circular motion. And once we're done, we just need to tie a knot to make sure it doesn't come loose. And since the loose end on the other panel is already here, we can just double knot it with that loose end. And we can leave it to sew in later on. Otherwise, we can tie a double knot with one of the stitches in the sweater. I usually do this by just going under one stitch and looping my yarn around the needle and then pulling through, and that should make a knot. And then we'll just do this to the other shoulder, and we can start working on the collar. You typically want to attach your yarn into the back panel so that the seam isn't in the front. So for my sweater, I don't really have a back panel, so I'm just going to go into the third stitch from the right, because we are going to be doing a double crochet 4 together in each of these corners. And just insert my hook and loop my yarn through, and then chain 2, and work a double crochet into that same stitch that I attached my yarn to. And then I'm going to work double crochets all the way across for this middle section. And we're going to go all the way across, but stop at the last 2. And now we'll double crochet 4 stitches together. For each of the 8 rows in the shoulders, I counted it as having 2 double crochets per row. So to double crochet 4 together, yarn over, insert your hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, then yarn over, go into the side of the first row on the shoulder part, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, then yarn over, go into the side of that same row, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 5 loops on the hook. So we basically started double crochets in the next 3 stitches, but we finished it in the 4th stitch. This just combines all 4 stitches into one and creates a curve so that the corners aren't so sharp. And then we'll just continue doing 2 double crochets per row along the shoulder pieces. And for each of the parts where I reach the shoulder seam, I will just add 1 double crochet. And before our last row, we are going to do a double crochet 4 together again. So again, you want to just start your double crochet, go into the next stitch, and pull through 2 loops, and then start the next double crochet, go into the side of that same row, and then pull through 2 loops, start another double crochet, and we're going to turn and start working along the middle part and just pull through 2 loops, and then finally do our last double crochet into that 4th stitch, pull through 2 loops, and then pull through all 5. And we'll just need to do this 2 more times until we reach the end of this round. And here I will be doing my very last double crochet 4 together. And once you're done, just slip stitch, and then we're going to start the ribbing. So we're going to be doing the ribbing while slip stitching it to the sweater every other round. To start, I'm going to chain 11 like I did for the other ribbed parts of this sweater. And then I'll do my first half double crochet into the second chain from the hook, and then do 9 more for the rest of the chain. And now we are going to slip stitch 3 together. To do this, insert your hook into that same stitch we slip stitched into, yarn over, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, the third one, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull that loop through the other 3 loops on your hook. And we'll do that one more time by pulling up a loop in the next 3 stitches, and with that last stitch, we're going to pull that loop through the other 3 loops on the hook. And now we're going to turn and do the second row of our ribbing. So I'm not going to chain 1 because we already slip stitched up, and I'm going to skip those first 2 V's that were from my slip stitches, and I'm going to go into the third one and do my 10 half double crochets into the back loops only. Once I get to the end, I'm going to chain 1 and turn. So normally I turn the other way, but this way we don't have to turn the whole project. And then I'll work 10 more half double crochets back the other way. And the very last double crochet is a little bit hard to see. And if you have trouble with this last stitch, then you can just skip doing the back loops only for the last one, because it doesn't make too much of a difference. And now is where we're going to slip stitch 3 together 2 times. So we're going into the next stitch over from the last slip stitch 3 together, and we're going to pull up loops in the next 3 stitches and pull that last loop through the other 3 loops. And then we'll do this one more time, turn, and work our half double crochets in the back loops only again. And we'll just continue this pattern all the way around this entire neck part. And I had 114 stitches, which is a multiple of 3. I'm going to be able to finish with a perfect slip stitch 3 together. But it's okay if you don't, you can just slip stitch 2 together or just 1. But after you've done all of your ribbed rows, and I did a total of 19, we're going to slip stitch the 2 ends together. And we'll be slip stitching from the outside in, but if you ended up on the other side, then you'll go inside towards the outside. And we're just going to be slip stitching the same way that we did for the cuffs of the sleeves. So again, we'll just insert our hook into the front loop of the first piece over and into the back loop of the back piece. And yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. And we'll just slip stitch all the way across for the 10 stitches that we have. And if there's a hole at the end that you want to close up, then you can just add another slip stitch. And once we're done, we can fasten off by chaining one, cutting off our yarn, pulling it through with our hook, and then using our hook to go inside the sweater and pulling that loose end through to the inside where we can sew it in. Now I'll be showing you my technique for how I like to weave my ends in. This part is also optional. You can choose to just not weave in your ends because this will be on the inside of the sweater and no one will ever see it. But if you do want to weave in your ends, here is how I like to do it. So first of all, since there are so many colors, I'm going to try to make sure that I weave in my ends under the same color so that I don't have other colors poking through. To demonstrate this, I'm going to take this light blue yarn in one of the cat's ears. First, I'll thread it into my needle and I'm going to tie a knot with my yarn needle. So I'll go under one stitch, wrap my yarn around the yarn needle, and then pull it through. If there was another loose end right next to it, then I could just double knot it with that loose end. But since we don't have that, then we'll just tie a knot with itself. The next step is to move it to an area where there is enough space horizontally for me to start to weave in the ends properly. So I'm just going to go under some stitches with my yarn needle, trying to move the loose end down, and once I get to that long horizontal line of blue, I can go under a few of the stitches and pull it through to the other side, and then I'll turn back around, skip one stitch, and go back under those same stitches. And again, I'll turn back around and go under those same stitches once again. Since you're looping the yarn back and forth in the same directions, if you tug it, then it'll be pulled in those different directions and it'll be hard to come loose. With the eyes, it's hard to weave your loose ends under the same colors since there's only 2 double crochets per eye. So we'll just have to go under the colored yarn. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm just going under a row of stitches and I'm checking on the other side to make sure that the white isn't poking through too much. And then I'll turn back around and skip one stitch and go back under those same stitches. And then I'll go back a third time while making sure that it's still not poking through to the other side. And then we can cut the excess yarn. I'll do this with the rest of my loose ends and we can start working on sewing the sleeves and down the sides of the sweater. The first thing you'll want to do is align the pieces together. As you can see from the graph, the green cat on the left should line up with the green cat on the right. Knowing this, I'm going to first look at the green cat with the eyes, and the lowest row for that one should be one row higher than the other side. So I'll use a bobby pin to pin those two parts together, and you can also add more bobby pins to make sure that it is perfectly aligned. To sew on the sleeves, we'll be using the same technique that we used to sew the tops of the shoulders together. First, you want to grab your sleeve and fold it along the seam. And you want to place it so that the seam goes along the bottom of the arm. And I'm going to be working into the panels of the sweater and then into the sleeve. I think it's important to stay consistent with this because it can make your seam look different if you switch it around for the other sleeve. So after I've threaded the yarn through my needle, I'm going to go into the side of the front panel and then into the top layer of the sleeve, going into the outer loop of that V of the stitch. And then I'll go back around into the top panel and then into the outer loop on that sleeve and back around to the panel into the sleeve. And I'll do this all the way until I reach the shoulder part. It's important once you get to the shoulder that you don't make it too tight, otherwise it'll start to puff out at the shoulder. So you want to be extra sure that everything is laying flat and you're not stitching this part too tightly. After we go over the shoulder, we're going to be working into the back panel and into the back of the sleeve. And then once we finish sewing down the back of the sleeve, we can start sewing the side of the sweater together. And you want to be sewing tightly enough that there are no holes, but also making sure to line up your pieces together properly. And once I got to the green part, I skipped over it and started working the rest of the white. I actually recommend that you start a new piece of yarn because I did end up actually cutting this in half later on because I didn't like that you could still see the white yarn. So I just continued sewing with my white yarn, and once I got to the ribbing, I did the outer loops only again, and then I tied a knot and weaved it in. For the green part, I grabbed a piece of green yarn and I just started sewing the two pieces together. And don't forget to tie a knot with both ends of this new piece of yarn. And that's the very last thing we have to do. That is all for this video. I really hope you enjoyed. Please leave a like if you did and subscribe for more. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.